Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News.
Tosin Oshinowo is the lead architect at CM Design Atelier, an architecture design consultancy practice with a minimalist, clean, and culture-rich architectural design approach. Tosin pushes African aesthetics through her designs and recently started her furniture line, Ile Ila, which she uses Yoruba fabrics like Xocai and Adire as upholstery, a nod to Tosin's heritage. Tosin, welcome to the morning show.
Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
You're an architect?
Yes, I am.
Wow, it's so lovely, isn't it? Each time I see a woman going into architecture, you know, some of those technical lines, it's really very interesting.
Yes.
But tell us something about African aesthetics through design. What does it mean? What is it about?
I mean, it's very interesting, this idea of our aesthetics and how we represent it physically. I think as a continent, so much has happened where we've had, from slavery to colonization, we've had so much external influence. It's been very difficult to represent our style in terms of design, in building, and in spaces without considering all the external forces. And when you want to start to represent it in its physicality, it can be a challenge. Most people end up thinking it's by putting some safari or some animal prints, you know, and that's what represents what it means to be African. But I think personally, that's just an idea of what it means to be African. I think being African is so much more. It's about how we use our space. It's about how families eat together. If someone comes to your home, you know, you always offer them food, you know. So, you know, how we plan our spaces, how we use our spaces, how, you know, the kitchen is at the back of the house because of the type of food we cook, it's not at the front, you know. That's actually what it means to be African. It's how we use our space. And then how we use our space and how we now translate that physically. So it's not obviously always literal.
Well, I used to teach a course called aesthetics.
Yes.
You know, and all those things about perspective, and aesthetics really is from the Greek word aesthenoia.
Yes.
And it means beauty. So what does beauty mean to you architecturally?
My style of architecture is very minimalist. It's very clean and plainer lines. The beautiful thing about beauty is it's all about perception. So it's dependent on all our individual ideas what beautiful is. I mean, what I consider as beautiful might not be beautiful to other people. But our style of architecture is plainer, clean lines, flat colors in particular. We are not big on iconography, which is considered the old order. We're very modernist in our style of build. And that also comes across in our product design as well.
And you also do Xocai Upholstery. How did that come about?
Yes, so again, you know, as an architect, we do a lot of interiors. We've done a lot of projects where we've had to design furniture. And I started looking interestingly at Xocai because I was quite interested in the fact that we have a lot of patterning. It's a very tough fabric as well, so it lends itself appropriately for upholstery. But what was very interesting was when I started to explore Xocai, I started to realize that we actually have culture encapsulated in our fabric because it has to do with fashion. So when I started to collate Xocai together to use for the chairs, my mom would say, oh, I remember when my mother used to wear that. That fabric is from the 50s. And my grandmother, you know, if you go through her wardrobe and you see things much earlier, you can start to see history. Xocai from the 80s starts to have a metallic thread in it, you know, because that started to come in as an import. The older Xocai, the Alari, you know, the red, you know, that is from like Ondo side, you know, those tend to come from much earlier on. And more recently now, we have the loom of the Xocai has changed. It's much wider. We have a lot more bright colors because of the external dyes that come in. So you start to see so much, you know, there is so much history being captured in this fabric. And then when you start to put them together and you create patterning and colors and contrast, you know, it's just a beautiful way of preserving our culture.
Well, but what's the feedback you get from your clients in terms of durability? Because I saw some of those pictures.
Yes.
My first concern was, you know, would this really be durable? When you do furniture with Adire, you do furniture with Xocai.
Well, then again, you know, this is where it's important to be technical. So as an architect, we look at the technicality. For the chairs that we use the Adire, we usually use them as covers that can be removed. So they can be washed and they can be dry cleaned, you know, and they can be changed, you know. With the chairs that we use the Xocai, we use them as fitted because it is a much tougher fabric.
Yes.
You know, and so we're very conscious of that. It is important when you're considering design design, it's not just the aesthetic. You have to think about the fact that it has to last the test of time. You know, what's the maintenance culture? We also advise people, particularly for the ashoke, you don't wash ashoke. Even ashoke that you wear is not washed. They traditionally it gets beaten. So you know you have to be conscious of the fact that it is a very tough cotton, and there are certain ways it should be cleaned. You have to carry that across also when you're putting it in furniture.
Well, I'm told you've done some designs, architectural designs.
Yes, you
including
did the Maryland Mall,
the
correct?
Maryland Mall and all that.
Yes.
How is it like as an architect?
I mean, it is quite challenging. Architecture is a profession that involves a lot of different people that work on a project. You work with structural engineers, service engineers, you have the contractors, you have the laborers, you know, and all of those people have to be coordinated. And this is when you're on site. Prior to that, there's obviously the design where you have to push the boundaries of your understanding. Do you want to create something that will stand out? I'm very particular about designing buildings that get noticed. You know, if you go into a space and you know that it's been well designed, you know, you might not be someone from the profession, but you realize that, you know, a lot more effort has been put into this. Or if you remember a building as a landmark, that's also quite important, you know. Are you making sure that you're creating a statement that it's not necessarily an eyesore, but something that people can have a conversation about? I think that's when you're beginning to push the boundaries of design. And I think Maryland did a very good job on that.
Yes, you talked about how to identify the African building at a TED Talk. Can you tell us about that? What is an African building?
Well, you know, funny enough, in all my discovery or learning on this, because there isn't really much written about it, I don't actually think that there is an African building now. But I think that our buildings are dependent on how we use our spaces, and I think it's important to know, to represent that correctly. There's been so much influence. We went from a very rural existence before slavery and colonization, and we had a big influx of urbanization. We were not allowed to develop our technology of building, you know, with the way we live in cities now. You know, we're not like the Japanese or the Chinese who had an opportunity, even though they had external forces come in, to develop their technology. We have a lot of materials that are imported now. Concrete is the mass product of the world now, and that determines how most buildings are built. So when you start to think about it in that sense, it's not really possible to have an African building in that sense. You know, we need to build up now. You know, Lagos is such a dense city. You know, we cannot take the technology of laterite and maybe ram the earth and translate it across directly. So I think that the way we can represent or have some kind of identity with an African building is actually how we personally use our space. As Africans, we're very particular about how we use our space, as in any culture, and we design accordingly. For example, in a Nigerian home, the master bedroom always faces the front for security reasons. You know, we have two sitting rooms.
For security reasons, or because the man has to be the one in front to protect the family.
He has to see his gate. He needs to see things. We have a culture of 2 living rooms if you have a large enough house. The private living room is where the family tends to stay. The public living room is the one downstairs where we entertain our guests. In a Nigerian home, in some cases, you would separate your dining from a visible point because culturally it is wrong to not offer food when people come to visit. You know, we make sure that our kitchens are at the back because of the kind of food that we cook. So, you know, the way you would design a Nigerian home is very different from how you would design a home.
Is that changing right now? Is that changing the way that we design?
No,
it's the same.
Because our culture is the same, you know, and so...
Well, I've been to homes where they have the dining rooms in the living room as well, here in Nigeria, in Lagos.
Yes.
So.
You know, I'm not saying it's, you know, obviously, things do move on, you know, but there's certain things that stay within the realm of how it has always been.
I got your point. It's about architecture, identity, and culture.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Then what's your take on the building code? We don't seem to have a building code in Nigeria. You go to some country, I know it exists. I'm saying that it's not being implemented.
Yes.
Go to a country like Morocco, you know. You go to Casablanca, you go to some other place in Morocco. Even to the color of the buildings, there's even a color code. But here in Nigeria, people just build all kinds of structures. You see a high-rise building, next to it is a bungalow, the next one is a duplex, making many of our cities look ugly. I mean, what do you think should be done about the building code?
Well, I mean, this goes even beyond the building code. This has to go with planning regulations as well. I mean, a lot of countries in the world, you know, if you're going to design a building, you have to sit within the existing aesthetic fabric of that street or that area. You know, the densities of buildings, you have certain places zoned as commercial, high-rise, you have some places low density, low-rise. You know, if those things are not enforced, there's not really much the architects can do at the end, because you have a client who's paying for a service, who have their own perceptions of what they want to achieve. You know, they have the regulations. If the regulations are not enforced, if policy is not put in place to ensure that people have to stay within the realms of reality, it's very difficult for the end consultant, being the designer, to then be able to advise the client accordingly and say, well, you know, actually, this will not be approvable if it's not done properly. In terms of building code, we do have a building code, but it needs to be enforced. In certain countries, if you don't get a building certificate, you cannot sell your property. So it's not in your interest not to follow the law. Yeah. But, correct, you know, that's, like I said again, it's policy. You know, it goes beyond the designer.
Well, Tosin, it was a pleasure having you here. I also wanted to highlight the fact that you're also an award-winning photographer and a mother.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Nice.
Well, what is your social media for people that
my social media handle is Tosin.Oshinowo, and for our office is cmdesign-atelier. And for the chairs, our very beautiful Xocai and Adire chairs is ile.ila, all on Instagram.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Nice.
That's all from Tosin Oshinowo. Up next, we'll have the CEO of Avon HMO, Ms. Adeshimbo Ilori, here to discuss health as a lifestyle choice in Nigeria. But before then, we'll take a short break on The Morning Show. Don't go away.